that's what the banks have, it makes the prices of the instruments on their books rise, and it makes them look more solvent than they are. So the whole reason for fixing the interest rate is to create this artificial appearance of bank solvency. And that's why the Fed and the Bank of England didn't blow the whistle on the banks fixing the Libor rate. There are other ways they fix the rates, the banks. If you, for example, if you sell an interest rate swap, that's a way of shorting interest rates. So if the banks put on a lot of sales of interest rate swaps, it drives down interest rates. And therefore, the values of the assets on their books rise. So it's part, in other words, Alex, we have a financial system that's been so corrupted by concentration of banks into too big to fail, and by deregulation, that the only way it can be kept afloat is through organized fraud. Fraud by the central banks, fraud by the banks themselves, and that's what it takes to keep the system afloat.
Now, you're obviously a total insider, can speak to that, and I agree with you that obviously that's the main overriding, issue. I mean, you've helped, set these things legally in the past, back with Congress and the Federal Reserve. But looking at this, isn't it also then that the banks then also get the money at 0% and then can loan it out for more? I mean, there is that profit angle as well. Yes,
but that's inconsequential compared to the rise to the capital gains.
Got it. It props up all the derivatives, and it props up the treasuries.
It props up everything that's linked to a floating rate, and since rates tend to move in the same direction, it also props up the treasuries. It helps the Fed's policy succeed. Now, the real question is, how long can all this propping up go on? The way I see it can come undone is when the BRICS and China and Japan and all these countries, they start abandoning the dollar. They won't just dump them overnight, but as they start using their own currencies in place of the dollar in international settlements, the demand for the dollar will start coming down. Now, it's harder for the Fed to fix the price of the dollar than it is for them to fix the price of bonds. Traditionally, they can support the dollar by raising interest rates, but they can't raise interest rates when their policy is low interest rates. So that's where the thing can come undone. They may find themselves unable to keep the dollar from sinking. And as the dollar sinks, it means the values of assets denominated in dollars also sink. So they will lose control over the bond price. This is why they manipulate the gold and silver market, because they don't want gold and silver rising. It's a way of devaluing the dollar. So every time the gold and silver starts going up, they sell naked shorts. It's also why they prevent any real decline in the stock market. Every time people exit the stock market and sell, they go in and buy stock index futures. And then that offsets the selling in the market.
And that's the plunge protection team, correct?
That's right. And so the whole financial system is rigged, not just interest rates. Gold and silver prices. Equity.
Dr. Roberts, it's been hard to get you on the last 2 weeks. Can I twist your arm to come back and give us the take on the military situation in the Middle East with Syria briefly?
All right.
All right, we'll be right back. I put him on the spot there so you can get him to stay longer with us. And then I'll get to the TSA rolling out nationwide, top story at Drudge Report, and a lot more coming up. We'll be right back. I'm Alex Jones. Yeah, Bloomberg has told police nationwide to stand down if we won't turn our guns in. Sounds like something Bane would do in a fictional movie. You break the law, Bloomberg. I'm working for the Republic. I'm the Infowars.com radio show. All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's go back to Dr. Paul Craig Roberts. Great website. I'm so glad in the last year or so he started this website, because it really is a nice website. I visit it all the time. PaulCraigRoberts.org and the Institute for Political Economy. I'll only keep about 5-6 minutes here, finishing up on what's happening militarily around the world. And I was asking him here in the break before last what he wanted to continue with, and he said, well, the subject we're on, where this leads. So I want to ask him, let's just do that now. Is there, from your historical research, from being the #2 in the Treasury, Wall Street Journal editor, at the head of big prestigious think tanks, the intelligence, you've been part of it. I know you've been ostracized a bit for not worshiping and drinking the Kool-Aid. You wouldn't be invited to the Wolf's Lair either in 1945, I imagine, by Hitler. But the point is that you see the emperor has no clothes. Is there any way to navigate this? Because you're saying the power structure doesn't really have a plan. I agree that they're out of control and delusional, but they got a plan. It's checkpoints everywhere. It's drones. It's citizen spies. All the local cops I talked to were told, yeah, we're getting ready for martial law, basically. I don't know if that's going to happen, but their plan is a post-free economy and this new kleptocrat type system. So is there any way to avert that on the road we're on?
Well, they may have a plan like that domestically, but I thought you were talking about internationally.
Sure, but everything. I mean, is there any way out of this? Is there any way for
Alex? What they may not, they may or may not understand is the economy is collapsing out from under them. Now, are they doing this because they know the economy is collapsing, or is it just a grab of power by security agencies and they're not aware? So I don't know what happens when the economy collapses out from under them. I don't know what they'll do or what they'll be able to do, or how much resistance they would meet from desperate people. I just can't predict that. But what I think is happening is much of the rest of the world is realizing that the days of the United States power has peaked and is on a decline. And so we're meeting firmer opposition from the Russians, firmer opposition from China, from other countries like Brazil. And I think our NATO puppets are also realizing that they may be aligned with a collapsing empire. And so we may see that all of a sudden Washington can't pull the strings anymore, that its hegemony is over. And if the world turns its back on us and ceases to follow our leadership and ceases to quake in fear and ceases to be bought off, then the whole situation changes. And I do not think Washington has any control over that. They may have a lot more control over the domestic population with the police state they've put in place. But how these things play out, I don't know. It'll be interesting times and dangerous times. And at some point, people like you and I may be carted off, or we'll have to shut up. So it's hard to know how this all ends up.
Wow, it's really is indescribable how real this is, and historically, for those of us that have studied history, how unbelievably off the chart things have gotten. You know who concurs with you, as you know, has been the last 4 chairmen of the Joint Chiefs until they got Dempsey, who reportedly can hardly tie his shoelaces. They've all said this is insane and that these wars are going to bring us down. They've said no repeatedly and been removed. And the head of CENTCOM, Fox Fallon, was removed. I actually know that the higher levels of the Pentagon have been telling the bankers, stop this. But it's a psychology of people like Corzine with 40-to-1 bets with other people's money, and it just you realize it's a bunch of arrogant, cocksure, Ivy League, wild men. Because I've been to some parties where some of these guys are at, and they act like 14-year-olds on drugs.
See, Washington is unaccountable. That was what was established by the Bush and Cheney administration, that the executive branch is no longer accountable to law, to the Constitution, to Congress, or to the courts. And Obama, who said he was going to fix all that, has merely continued it and codified it into law, so that we now have the executive branch is independent of law, of the Constitution, and is not accountable. The President of the United States can announce that he has a policy of drawing up a list of American citizens to be assassinated without due process, and he's not immediately impeached. Now, if Reagan had done something like that, or for that matter, something as recent as Clinton, they would have been immediately impeached. So this shows you how rapid the descent is, how rapid the changes are, that the president can say, hey, I can kill any American that I'm suspicious of without giving any account.
Or NATO is over our military. I mean, that way they just get, it's
well,
really...
I think that's not true.
No, I agree with you.
Our military is over NATO. They are, first of all, NATO hasn't got any military. It's the American military, and we dress it up with a few small detachments of people here and there, but the entire countries of Europe, their military probably isn't any larger than the Georgia National Guard.
No, listen, I totally agree with you. In fact, let me elaborate. This is how they get Congress out of the way, who is over the power to wage war in the purse, as you know, in the Constitution, is now they say, oh, NATO and the UN is who we get authorization for, but really NATO and the UN are puppets of the military-industrial complex that Eisenhower warned us about. And so it's this game, because right in front of this is this military coup run by the banksters.
Well, I think that you're right, that when we say, oh, we don't have to go to Congress, we go to the UN, or we can go to NATO, we say that when we think we can make the UN and NATO do what we want. The trouble with the UN, though, is that China and Russia have vetoes, and they're using them now. So that avenue is not working for them. And of course, they tried to overthrow Russia by financing the Russian political opposition through the National Endowment for Democracy, which is essentially a CIA State Department front. And Putin finally caught on and has now made all of the Russian opposition that are funded by American money to register as foreign agents. So the Russians are catching on. The Chinese can see the American bases surrounding them. You know, we're trying to get the naval base from Vietnam. We're trying to get an air base from Thailand. We're trying to get the Philippines to let the Navy back in Subic Bay. We're building a new base on a South Korean island. We've sent Marines to Australia and other places. And so China sees this. And so this, of course, will affect their attitude toward cooperating with the United States on a variety of fronts. And we may think we can buy off the other Asian countries, Indonesia, Vietnam, Thailand, but China is close to them. We're not. And they'll assess that. So I think what we may see here is the beginning of the unraveling of American hegemony. I don't.
Yes,
think
sir. In closing, that was my next question. And then I want to briefly ask you about Syria and just the spectacle of al-Qaeda publicly working for the West now, which of course always did. But looking at this, I mean, I've studied history, but you negotiated with Russia, you dealt with it, you know, you were alive back when this was all really, you know, in the thick of it. Do you ever remember a time where Russian presidents and prime ministers openly said, okay, we're preparing to use nuclear weapons against you, don't deploy those missiles? I mean, that, because historically the Russians don't usually bluff, and for me, that's a big deal, and now they've put Spetsnaz into Syria. We know Western commandos through NATO, U.S.-backed, are in there, you know, trying to take Damascus and other areas. I mean, this clearly that's not a suicide bomb that just killed most of the military leadership. It went through a window. It was a cruise missile. I mean, all of this, I mean, this is war. This is full-on war with proxy states.
Well, it's very dangerous. I certainly agree. And you're completely right that both Medvedev and Putin have raised the specter of nuclear war. They say that these things are getting out of hand for no good reason, and the downside is horrendous. And Washington remains deaf. They don't hear it. So, as I have said before in other articles and for quite a time, the United States is the greatest threat to life on Earth of any country that is in existence. And the outcome may be that there's no life on Earth. And certainly they don't listen to anybody. They don't listen when the Russian prime minister and the Russian president issue clear warnings. They don't hear it. So why are they going to listen to me?